Right, hi. We welcome you to another episode of Learning Stories. This is a show where we interview a diverse set of learners from the 21st century. In each episode of this show, we interview a guest who has a story to share about how they acquired a set of skills and knowledge in a creative and innovative way. In the process, we hope to uncover a new understanding of learning as conceptualized and imagined by the guest on our show. A focus for this season of Learning Stories is to speak to amazing young Indians who are doing powerful things in their own context to shape the future of our country. And one such amazing young Indian is Arun Mulloth. He's a friend that I went to school with, and we recently reconnected through LinkedIn. And I think he's had such a inspiring journey, and we're here to learn a little bit about him. But let's get into his bio before we start our discussion. So, Arun is the head of business development at the Gagan Narang Sports Promotion Foundation. This is a non-profit that runs Guns for Glory, India's premier shooting academy. Arun's job is to engage in partnerships and collaborate with central and state government bodies, as well as private institutions, to promote the academy and the athletes in the Olympic sport of shooting. Prior to this role, he was the Chief Operating Officer at VeloCT, a multi sport academy where he managed multiple verticals including football, cricket, MMA, and shooting. He has a postgraduate diploma from SMRI Kochi. And before his stint in sports management, he also completed a 4 year engineering degree and spent 2 years working as a quality analyst. So there's a lot to unpack there. But before we go into your journey, Arun, I'd love to know a little bit about your childhood. What were some of the things you enjoyed doing? Where did you study? And was sports always a passion for you growing up?
Sure. Hi. First of all, thanks for having me here, Abhishek. It's great to connect with you also after a long time. And speaking about my journey, my childhood was spent. I was brought up in Bahrain, just like you. I initially went to the Asian School Bahrain, and after graduating out, I shifted to my hometown, and that's in Kochi in Kerala. That's where I did my graduation in engineering as well. Speaking about my childhood, I would say that one thing that I should tell you is I was diagnosed early on with meningitis. So meningitis is a disease that affects the spinal fluid, the fluid covering your brain, basically. That's called the meninges. So for that reason, I was constantly falling sick. And at that point of time, my parents, the doctors, initially could not figure out what exactly was the challenge or what is the reason I kept falling sick all over again. This is somewhere around first standard, I believe. And at that point of time, I sort of completely was cut off from the outside environment. And at that time, I used to watch a lot of these kids out there playing your local sports. And I used to dream. It's the honest truth that I used to dream of playing sports, just watching the other kids play around because I was a really sick kid. So luckily for me, the meningitis was detected or diagnosed quite early. So for that reason, it did not cause any serious damage or tumors, which are the long-term consequences. So the moment, I had to undergo treatment for 3 months. I was admitted to a hospital as well. The moment I recovered from that disease and came back to my normal school and other affairs, I was the only thing on my mind was sports, and I think it just sort of took off from there. I started with cricket. I went into football. Football was always a long term thing for me. But initially, I dabbled in a lot of different sports. I tried out karate as well, and karate unfortunately didn't work out because I wasn't particularly a healthy kid at that point of time. But my childhood was mostly built around sports for that reason because of the early onset of meningitis. I sort of dreamt of becoming a sports person, watching legends like Kobe Bryant, in Lakers and in LA Lakers. He may rest in peace. And other, of course, our Indian athletes as well, Sachin Tendulkar, MS Dhoni later on. All of them played a pivotal role in inspiring people like me to take up sports.
Yeah, that's amazing, Arun. I can't imagine how hard it must have been for you and your family, and you found that outlet in sports, to really express yourself. And that's something I was curious about, Arun. Like you've trained and worked with a lot of young people playing sports, and playing at a very competitive level. So, what are some skills you think young people can develop from playing any sport, not just shooting? Like, what are some life lessons you think they can acquire from being actively involved in a physical activity?
Well, it's interesting that you say physical activity, Abhishek, because since you mentioned shooting, I should say that, of course, all sports for that matter, even chess, for example, it has its own physical and mental attributes. So, of course, games like chess are mostly where you do not do a lot of movement, physically speaking. But they say that the chess grandmasters burn hundreds and thousands of calories while they are going through their matches. So that does tend to show you, and of course, the brain consumes around 60% of the food that we eat, the caloric content that we consume. So at that point of time, the more interesting point, the question is, where do you learn to apply these attributes of yours? What sort of attributes does the sport that you play enhance? And to broadly classify them, you can classify them into two. One is an individual sport like chess or shooting or archery, and then you have the team sports like your cricket, basketball, hockey, football. So these are the kind of broad classifications that we bring into the sport, as in I bring in my current role as well. Because at this point of time, while we work with the athlete, we need to put ourselves in their shoes. We need to understand what exactly it is that they're going through. And at that point of time, you need to understand what are the inputs, what are the requirements that the athlete needs in order for them to perform at an optimum level and at an enhanced level. And so, putting yourself in the shoes of the athlete, you understand that it is not just, uh, say, suppose for example, a lot of people think that football is just about kicking the ball into the goalpost, into the net. But as we all know, it is one of the most widely watched sports on the planet, and there are a lot of components that go into making a football team work. There is a team chemistry factor. There is the point of managing the team, making sure that you cannot put square pegs in round holes and expect them to function the way you want them to. And when you got now coming to individual sports, here you have to understand that coaching is the primary and the most important component in grooming an athlete. And so I work for Gun for Glory Shooting Academy, India's top ranked institution for teaching the Olympic sport of shooting. So, for those of who don't know, I'll just give them an introduction into what Gun for Glory is. Gun for Glory was founded by the Commonwealth and Olympic medalist Sri Gagan Narang and his coach Sri Pawan Singh. It was founded in 2011 under the aegis of Gagan Narang Sports Promotion Foundation, which is the non-profit that I work for. And it was founded with the aim and the vision of producing medals in the Olympic sport of shooting for India. And at that point of time, there were not a lot of academies that taught shooting as a sport in the country. And even if you look at a broader sporting culture in our country, in India specifically, we have not had that academy culture or that teaching culture. So you yourself being into teaching will realize the importance of having a mentor, of having somebody who can guide you, mold you, understand your perspective, understand the realities of the environment into which you're pushing the child. Because most often we are working with children. So, it's like they say, it's one of my favorite sayings is education in youth is like engraving in stone. So here you will encounter challenges. You will Each child is unique. Each child has their own set of skills, and they have their, let's not call it weaknesses. Let's just say that they have their own traits, or they have things that balance out their strengths. So at that point of time, it is important to understand how you can motivate the child, how you can work with them. So we have a lower age limit of 10 years in our academy, taking into account some of the safety rules and regulations, as you can imagine, go into doing what we do. So, so for that reason, we work with kids from school curriculum age of somewhere around fourth or fifth grade onwards. And there is no, and the beauty of shooting sport is that there is no upper age limit to it. So we just have a lower age limit of 10 years in sport, there is absolutely no upper age limit. And so for that reason, I also tried shooting at the age of 26. So I started out pretty late. But then I was inspired by the story of your namesake, Abhishek Verma. He's not a very popular figure, but he was an engineer just like myself. He started out shooting at the age of somewhere around 25. And at the age of 30, he was playing the Olympics. So it tends to show that all you need in this case, a lot of people under the expectation, a lot of parents these days want their children to start off at an early age, thinking that if I don't give them because I did not get this chance here, meaning the parent has often not got that chance because all of our parents, okay, not everybody, but most of our parents wanted us to go into a professional environment, maybe work for a corporate or start your own business, that sort of thing. But as we realize, there's a lot more to life than just building a career out of it. It's also about building a well-rounded personality, and that is where sports, coming back to your original question, that is where sports plays a huge role, Abhishek, because that is where you learn to work as part of a team. You learn the essence of sportsman spirit, of learning what it takes to sacrifice yourself so that the unit works, or the team succeeds at that point of time. So sports can teach you a lot in that perspective. And not just as a sports person, but as somebody who's worked in sports administration, I see that. So maybe we can get into this later, but a lot of women who have actually started out as athletes tend to go on to occupy high level positions in various corporations and companies. So I think sports plays a major role in that sense as well.
Yeah, that's powerful, Arun. And, you summarized that really well. But in terms of your journey, Arun, I know you transitioned from being an engineer to this field of sports management. So, can you tell me a little bit about that journey for you? Like, why did you choose engineering, and then why did you choose sports management in your career?
That's a very good question, and to be honest, it was a little bit of luck. It was a little bit of misfortune, as well as a lot of combined factors that go into any major decision that we take in our lives today. But one of the reasons the reason I took up engineering is because I went into the computer science field. So I did my BTech in computer science and engineering from one of the top ranking government institutions in Kerala. And at that point of time, all we knew when we graduated, so there are a lot of career counseling. You and me being from ISB, we know that a lot of career counseling was there during schooling days as well. And all we kept hearing about, or all the what we kept what we wanted to hear maybe was placements. So what we wanted to know was which company is coming recruiting in this particular college. Nobody actually talked about that 4 years of experience. I mean, if you're going into BTech, you have to go through 4 years. So at that point of time, very few people talk about the whole college experience, or maybe it was just the culture that I was brought up in. So all we kept hearing about was what you will do after college. So at that point of time, there was not a lot of thought we put into. All we knew is get into a good college and your life, and just pass out with good grades and your life is settled. Turns out that's not the case. So college for me was an eye opener in a lot of ways. So I was brought up in Bahrain, in the Kingdom of Bahrain, which is a very tiny island for our viewers, very tiny island next to Saudi Arabia in the Arabian Sea. And the kind of opportunities that we got, to be honest, Abhishek, we were born with a silver spoon. I mean, the kind of opportunities that we had, or maybe the kind of resources that were given to us, were huge. And for me, it was a quantum leap to move on from 12, passing out of 12th grade from a private school in Bahrain to coming to Kerala and to coming to India for that matter, to understand the perspective of the everyday man. And at that point, it did take me a while to get adjusted to the new environment that I had to transition over to. But by the time I did that, 1 year of college was already done, and people were going for internships. Meanwhile, here I was still struggling to write my assignments and submit them on time. and computer science is actually one of the easier fields in engineering compared to your core disciplines like mech or electrical for that matter. So by the time I was 2 years into college, people were already deciding on their future path, and I was still stuck. And a message to youngsters out there: this is perfectly normal. A lot of my friends went through the same thing, and at that time, the common bonding element was sports. So I had a bunch of friends who were extremely passionate about football at that point of time. And during school days, also, I used to dabble in it quite often. I was in and out of the school team as well. But I never took it as seriously as, for that matter, India does have a very good sporting culture when it comes to glory, when it comes to achieving something. But that's what I said, that's what we don't have is the academy setup or the learning setup for actually picking up the sport. And it is all focused on medals. So it is all focused on the ultimate aim. So if you are an Olympian, if you are a javelin thrower, you want to be the next Neeraj Chopra. If you are an athlete, if you are a boxer, you want to be the next Mary Kom or the next Lovelyna. Now a lot of it is centered around medals and success and landing, and unfortunately there are other elements like landing a government job or getting a lot of if you win a medal at the Olympics, you are pretty much guaranteed cash injection from half a dozen state and central government agencies. So that is what people in our country, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm glad it is there to back up the athletes, but at the same time, there was no support system for those people who did not succeed in the sport. And this is what happened to me because during so I was in the college team, I was in the university team, and I was a goalkeeper. I was a goalkeeper for like 20 years, and I had a major injury which kept me out of the game for around 16 months. And at this point of time, I was completely disconnected from reality. So this was somewhere around the second year of engineering, went on to my third year. And of course, my academics happened on the side, but I was forever disappointed because it was meningitis all over again. It was first standard all over again. And to realize that this is a part of life, it took a lot of time for that thought to settle in because unfortunately, I was not born into a family of athletes. I was born into a family of academicians. A lot of my cousins, a lot of my uncles, aunts were high achievers. They were professors, PhD holders, a lot of engineers as well. So I did not, unfortunately, have anybody to turn to, but my friends kept me going at that point of time. And when I recovered from the injury, I knew by then that my career as a professional was pretty much done because I was around 20 at that time. And if you want to make it as a professional, in India, especially in football, for example, you need to start out early and you need to succeed early. A couple of my friends went on to play the ISL. A few play for the Navy and in I League as well. So I did have the opportunity of. I can tell the kids that I work with that I have played with professionals who are playing it at the highest levels of the game. So what I feel personally speaking is that there should be a platform for athletes to succeed not just as sports persons or as athletes in their respective field but also as human beings, and they need that support system to exist in order for them to succeed and to become better human beings. And that, I think, is a vital role that we as individuals, people like me who are into this field, that is the contribution that we have to make to society.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful, Arun. And I feel like there's a lot spoken about the success of an athlete, but there's a long process leading up to that successful medal, and even beyond that, their life beyond that medal is also as important as their life leading up to it. Now, I know you pursued a sports management course at SMRI in Kolkata, and I was looking through the curriculum, and it's something I've never, thought about because I'm also really passionate about sports, and I saw some of the courses there, and I'm like, this is so amazing to learn. So, like, and right after you finished that course, Arun, you managed a sports academy and a sports setup called VeloCT. So how, like, what did you learn in the course, and how did you apply that in that job at VeloCT for 4 years, where you were actually managing an academy?
Well, I did start out at VeloCT as an intern, and at the end of 4 years, I was the CEO over there. So I had like a I had a good graph over there. It was a very small institution, but I did most of my learning there. But the prelude to that was, of course, my SMRI days. That was in Kochi in Kerala, and it's funny. It was another coincidence that I came across this because I did work, as you mentioned when you introduced me. I did work 1.5 years, 18 months as a quality analyst at a corporate institution, and that also was an eye opener, to be honest. And of course, that was because I graduated out and got placed almost immediately. So it was the natural way of things. It was just the way that it happened. You're done with engineering, you get placed in a company, you start working there, you undergo the training process, then you realize how the organization functions. Suddenly, you are into the rat race, and then it's like every day is I wouldn't say it's monotonous, but I would say that it is a routine by itself. And suddenly, somewhere down the line, around 6 to 8 months or around a year into that point of time, I realized that okay, maybe just maybe there's nothing wrong with the job role, but it just might it's again the question of square pegs and round holes. Maybe this is not what is right for me. And at that point, when I expressed this concern to my parents, I was one of those fortunate ones who had very supportive parents. So they told me that, of course, they had the usual worries about having a secure job and that sort of backup in place, but they did understand the need to pursue what you're passionate about. And so for that reason, incredibly grateful to my mom and dad for all the support that they offered me at that point of time. So I did have a discussion with the HR team, and the HR team was also very helpful. They did suggest a few institutions to me as well for pursuing my interest in sports. And when I graduated out, sorry, when I left Sutherland, which is where I worked for 18 months, I did take a break. I did sort of my own thing. I dabbled in a few, alternative schemes for like a couple of months. But then by then I knew that sports is what I wanted to get into. And my mom was also very helpful. She did a lot of Google searching, a lot of Quora hunting, and she's the one who came across this particular college. And so the reason I took up the sports management degree is because I felt that at that point of time, so I had already done a bit of man management in my earlier job as well. I was auditing around 30 employees in my role as a quality analyst at Sutherland. So at that point of time, I knew that maybe working with people might be more suitable to me than say working in front of a PC. Even though I had this background in computer science and engineering, I really did feel that maybe because I always had that let's say that attribute of communicating well with people. So for that reason, I could sense that when I speak to those people, I was able to deliver the message of what it is that we wanted out of them, what I wanted them to do, and they would understand and they were able to apply it. So I thought maybe management would be the right way to go, which is the reason why I did the PGDSM course. And SMRI, what it did was that was also an eye opener again. A lot of experiences, a lot of things that we thought about the sports environment, which were proven wrong during my early days in my PGDSM course. To understand, for example, the fact that the Indian sporting industry is very much baby industry. It is still booming. It is still growing, and at this point of time, it is like, let's say, the IT industry in the 70s or 80s. It is still learning. It is still understanding, and it is still evolving as its own industry. And at that point of time, you cannot expect to walk into it like you can walk into a corporate environment, like you may walk into, like, say, the pharma industry or any corporate industry for that matter. So sports is not a corporate industry, Abhishek. So at that point of time, what SMRA did for me was basically pushed me out into the open environment, and I had to work with several government agencies. I worked with the Kerala State Electricity Board to conduct a series of basketball competitions. So it was a lot of learning on the ground level. We did a lot of event management stuff. we conducted the series of competitions called Hoopathon, which was basically a series of matches in different districts of the state between India's all-star women's basketball team, versus a team called Ringwood Hawks from a professional team from Australia. So they would play a series of matches in. So basketball is still it is still fortunately or unfortunately it's still a latent sport in India. But those who have played it really understand the energy, the dynamic that go into the sport. And I will be honest, I believe that basketball is the most intensive sport out there. I mean, there are a lot of extreme sports which might take the crown, but basketball is sort of the mainstream sport where there is a lot of chance for injuries. First of all, there's a lot of there's a need for sports science intervention. Whether it is your physiotherapist, you need a strength and conditioning expert, you need a rehabilitation expert, you need a lot of support stuff if you wish to make it as a basketball player. So one of my he was my classmate during my PGDSM days, and he also went on to work with me in my first job at VeloCT. He was also a state level basketball player. So he used to tell me about all the elements that go into this sport, and I had played it very. I mean, I have played it at just for fun basically, but I did not have any professional training. So at that point of time, I realized that every sport has its own nuances. And coming to the administrative part of it, so what PGDSM taught me was that our environment, Indian sporting environment, it is frankly a work in progress. There are a lot of things. There is too early to get into the politics of it, maybe, maybe not. But there is definitely that component as well. There's a lot of questions and a lot of controversy surrounding Indian sports, unfortunately. But on a broader level, everybody wants to do what is best for the sport, and they want to see athletes succeed. They want to see India succeed. A lot of people who are born with that passion of wearing the Indian tricolor on their jacket, and a lot of people who are working extremely hard to make that happen. And that is something that I learned during my stint at SMRI.
Yeah, and I think you speak for a lot of like the emotions that a lot of Indians have with sports is also very strong, right? And I think for a majority of us, it's often cricket because that's the one we're most exposed to growing up. And you see like the parallels between a sport like cricket and a lot of other sports in the country, right? Where you in cricket, for instance, you have a strong like district state ecosystem that allows these athletes to function at a very high level. And then, even at the national level, with competitions like the IPL, there are funding and exposure sort of strategies that allow them to increase their skill set, but also they have like the support environment of nutritionists, of dietitians, of psychologists, of therapists. And I was looking at Sri Gagan Narang's story as well. I know that early on in his journey, he had the support of this organization called Olympic Gold Quest,
That's
and that was started by Geet Sethi and Prakash Padukone. And that sort of support really helped him when he was an athlete competing, at the London Olympics, at the Beijing Olympics. So, like, with respect to your work at the Gagan Narang Sports Foundation, Arun, I wanted you to throw some light on maybe how the sport of shooting functions. So, what is it like for an athlete to start off and actually make it big in that sport? And then, what are some support systems that your organization can give that athlete as they go to the highest level in that sport?
Indeed, Sri Gagan graph is a very, very enlightening one. Now that you say, now that you hit upon that point, Abhishek, that because so of course our India's very first Olympic medal, the Olympic gold medal came from Sri Abhinav Bindra in 2008 at the Beijing Olympics, which was in the 10-meter air rifle event, which is one of the most popular events out there. And Prior to that, there was, of course, India's first medal, the Olympic medal in shooting sport, came in the double trap event. And that was Sri Lieutenant Colonel Rajavardhan Singh Rathore in the 2004 Athens Olympics. So, Rathore ji, being from the army, he had a different sort of support system in place. And they obviously have a lot of resources when it comes to training, when it comes to access to weaponry, access to targets, access to world class coaching, etc. Shri Abhinav Bindra, like us, maybe was born with a little more golden than a silver spoon, let's say, because he had the resources to set up a shooting range in his own backyard, in his own house. But Mr. Gagan Narang's story is very interesting because if you've seen, so you mentioned you've seen the TED Talk. So there is a TED Talk on YouTube about Mr. Narang's journey into shooting sport. And of course, I work being one of the senior figures in his foundation. I've had the privilege of working with him, and for that reason, a lot of things that I've learned from him as an athlete, but also as a sports administrator, because he is currently the vice president of the Indian Olympic Association. So, in addition to being an Olympic medalist and starting Gun for Glory Shooting Academy, he has gone on to do a lot for Indian sports. He was, of course, the chef de mission. He was a leader of the Indian Olympic contingent at the Paris Olympics, in fact, at the regular Olympics, that is. So, for that reason, there's uh, a lot of insights that he has shared with us. But to speak about that, so you asked me two questions. One is uh, regarding Mr. Narang's journey. So let me just touch on that first. Mr. Narang was born into a very middle class family. His parents were government employees, and for that reason, they were. So he's from Haryana. His family is from Haryana, even though he was brought up in Hyderabad. So for that reason, they sort of, if you look at the history of athletes in the country, you see that Haryana, Punjab, Delhi, these are the states or the cities which produce the maximum number of athletes, the maximum number of Olympians who go on to do well in their various sports. But it does show that there is that sporting culture inherent in those states. So I guess that would have helped them in that sense. The parents would have had the right mindset. But shooting as a sport, which is again touching on your second question about how to get into the sport, shooting as a sport has held that let's say that caption of being an elite man sport or being an expensive sport, let's say, because the kind of equipment, the kind of weapons that they use are pretty expensive. They cost, like, say for example, the weapons that you see Manu Bhaker use at the current Paris Olympics. Her pistol costs somewhere around 2.5 to 3.5 lakhs. So for that reason, it is an expensive sport. There's no two ways about it. But what Sri Gagan Narang managed to do is to sort of bring down that affordability factor by by actually creating an ecosystem. So you touched upon OGQ, upon Olympic Gold Quest, and Gagan Narang is sort of the poster boy for OGQ because he was one of the first athletes to be sponsored by OGQ, and he's the first one to win an Olympic medal while being sponsored by OGQ. Nowadays, you got Neeraj Chopra, you got Manu Bhaker, you got Ms. Mary Kom. A lot of the biggest athletes in our country are sponsored by OGQ. But that success was built upon the success of Sri Gagan Narang and a few other core athletes who came through that OGQ program. So I've had the pleasure of course, having this discussion with one of the co-founders, Sri Biren Reskunia, who is also the co-founder of OGQ again. And the major factor he stresses upon is not the funding or the sponsorship that you get once you become an elite level athlete, but what you need to get to that position where you can play the international competitions, where you are on that precipice, where you're showing yourself as a talent, you are among the best among your peers in the country. Maybe you've won a couple of national medals, and at that point you are on that precipice where you're about to take the leap. And at that point of time, what you need is the right kind of guidance, not just on monetary terms, but also at an intellectual, or let's say it is more of a mentorship that you require at that point of time. And When it comes to speaking about my institution, about Gunfo Glory, of course, in addition to Sri Gagan Narang, we have some of the top coaching talents in the country. So these coaching talents did not become coaches overnight. They were also athletes to begin with. So it is about identifying the right kind of people. It is a human resource task basically to identify the right kind of qualities in a person. So there might be a person who is an athlete. So this is me at the end of my engineering. I'm just done with I'm just done with my college. I was not able to make it big in my sport. And at that point of time, the question comes, what do I do with my career? A lot of people choose to go into government jobs because that is a safe and secure option out there. Luckily for me, even though my parents did hint at it, I did not want to do that. I was not enchanted by the prospect of job security or pensions after I turned 60. I wanted to do something right now. And at that point of time, sports was the most dynamic and still continues to be one of the most dynamic environments in our country. And so when I got into Confo Glory Shooting Academy, I encountered a very young team, a very dynamic and vibrant young team who were very passionate about doing something because they felt that maybe I was not able to make it as an athlete. But now I have all these learnings. I have I have gone through the pipeline that molds a national medalist. But what does it take to convert the next national medalist into an international medalist? So there was a very moving moment in August when Swapnil Kusale won India's third medal in shooting at the Paris Olympics in the 50-meter rifle shooting category, where there was a discussion between two of India's former great athletes, one being Mr. Gagan Narang himself, and the other was Joydeep Karmakar. So Mr. Joydeep Karmakar finished fourth in the 2012 London Olympics in the 50-meter event. So you can imagine how hard it must have been for him to just finish below the podium level. And when Swapnil won 50-meter, there was a discussion on Geo Cinema between Mr. Narang and Joydeep, between JK and Mr. Narang, where they discussed the 50-meter event, where the Indian Federation chose not to send athletes to international in the 50-meter event because there was no chance of us getting a medal. So we've come a long way from that. Now we've actually gone on to win. So in a very moving moment, Mr. Narang actually broke into tears because he said that. So he's represented India in the 50-meter event as well at the Olympics, in fact. And it was a very moving moment for the reason that it showed how much the sport had come across in the last 10 in the last decade. And so it sort of speaks volumes for the effort that people like him have put in. Organizations like OGQ, the central government with its initiatives like the Target Olympic Podium Scheme, which is a central government initiative by the MIA's Ministry of Youth Affairs and Sports. The Khelo India scheme more recently, which has which focuses on identifying talents at a younger age. So we talk about why China has so many Olympic medals. Why does the US have so many Olympic medals? But India is still lagging behind. The reason is that that inherent sporting culture has yet to develop in our country. It is there. It is still there in each and every one of us, which is the reason why, with in the limited time frame in the last decade, we've managed to produce five medals in that's sorry 7 medals in shooting sport in the last couple of decades. That's the Olympic medals that I'm talking about, and not to mention sports like hockey, which we have a really rich history, and archery, where we always seem to be on the precipice of doing well. Sheetal Devi is a great example in the Para Olympics. So her story, of course, everybody knows. Sheetal's story, being born without arms. The very, the very, all you need to do is look at her. All you need to do is watch her play, and your mood. That's the whole reason people like me are in this industry, Abhishek, because to see those people come through, to see. So I have an athlete. She is a U.S. citizen, but she's Indian. She played the U.S. Junior Olympics, and when she came back with a medal, she video called me to show me the medal. And all I could think of was the 10-year-old who walked into the academy in VeloCT, asking what does a gun look like, and I am the one who handed her a gun for the very first time. So to see these kids go on to make waves in the international circuit, it is actually very. I can't describe a better feeling. I can't describe the feeling that you get. It is what it is. It is the best feeling to see these children come through and make it big in the sport. and that is what drives people like me, and of course the team that I work with, because it's a bunch of very passionate, very highly motivated individuals who feel that okay, maybe I was not able to do it, but I want to contribute to the sport. And that sort of thing, that sort of motivation or that sort of skill cannot be taught. It has to come from inside.
Yeah. Yeah, and like I was just thinking about India's performance in the last Olympics. The most medals we won were in shooting, with Manu Bhaker winning in the individual and team event, and then Swapnil winning that medal in the other individual event. So, just to think about how much media coverage a sport like shooting receives, in comparison to maybe cricket. And I think that for most people growing up in India, there's always that comparison to cricket, right? As the hierarchy in terms of the ecosystem we have there and the ecosystem. But, I was looking at the Olympic medal tally for the last 20 to 40 years. At least in the last 20 years, China has been dominating the shooting events. And then before that, the Soviet Union and Russia had like a long run. So, what are some things that these two countries had in their ecosystem that was able to produce such positive results that maybe we can learn from as a country and adapt, not just in Guns for Glory, but at the district and state level of different setups around the country, so we have more of these results coming out in the long term.
That's again a good question. Well, it points to the broader sporting ethos or the holistic environment that we strive to create. And like I said, Abhishek, it's not all. I mean, of course, the Olympic medal or the medals, whether it is at the Olympics, whether it is at international level or at state or district or national levels, it is more about driving that spirit of playing a sport. So the whole reason, so you mentioned, of course, Soviet Union and China. I would like to bring across another example. So I'm not going to talk about. I will talk about shooting in a moment, but I'm going to talk about sports in general. There's a very interesting statistic. I think this was after the Rio Olympics that the statistic came out that the city of Manchester in the UK has more Olympic medals than any country uh, below the top 10 at the Olympics. Basically, around close to 150 countries compete in the Olympics, if I'm not wrong, and around 140 of them did not have the combined medal tally that the city of Manchester in the UK had. So at that point of time, the question does come: okay, what it is that is it something that Manchester is doing differently? Is it the people there that are doing differently? Is it something to do with the genetics? Like they asked the question about the Jamaicans when it comes to the track and field events. And Jamaica aside, coming to Manchester, the very obvious link at that point of time is industrialization, which happened in the 18th century, in the late 18th and the 19th and 20th, early 20th centuries, where the factory culture came in and people were sort of, so we know how monotonous factory work can be. So at that point of time, what they wanted was to sort of, once they were done with their work, either you go to the nearest ale, the nearest pub, and you do your own thing there, or else they had the idea of forming a community, forming a group and playing some sort of sport. And I am a strong believer in that kind of institution which sort of relies on building a community in based around the sport, because what that does is it doesn't just groom you to become a good athlete, but it also grooms you to become part of something bigger than yourself. And at that point of time, what it does is it sort of builds that culture of integrating sports into your everyday life, which is something that India might be lacking, to be very honest. So a lot of schools emphasize on the need. Nowadays, things are changing, of course. A lot of schools out there who have a built-in sporting curriculum along with their curricular activities. It is not even an extracurricular activity anymore. It is a co-curricular activity, which I would say is a seismic shift in our education system. The government is doing its bit as well. But if you ask me, well, if you take, there is obviously, now coming to the genetic factor, there is obviously the fact that countries like the Czech Republic, the Italians, the Soviet Union, or Russia, yes, they have done well in the sport, and it does point to some sort of. Now, if you ask me, I cannot really. because Soviet Union, if you look at the results, it is not a consistent set of medals. It is more like they have produced elite level athletes. So there are a few prospects who shine head and shoulders over the, like India has Neeraj Chopra. So we have that kind of talent come through the ranks in every sport. Some of them make it like Neeraj did. So some of them sort of stumble at some juncture, like some of the athletes we've seen at the Paris Olympics as well. So at that point of time, the more important question is, what is the ecosystem needed to produce this kind of medal tally? And what China does is China has integrated it into their educational curriculum. The Chinese have managed to sort of convince the everyday individual that sport is a part of your everyday life. Now you can choose to become an athlete, meaning a professional, or you can just choose to integrate into your everyday activity. Instead of going at the home at the end of the day, switching on the TV and scrolling through, or scrolling through your smartphone feed, you can choose to go out there, engage with the broader community, and at that point of time, come back with a set of values which you would never learn from any screen. So it is about building that community. Like that is what the Mancunians did in the UK in the 19th century. That is what China and maybe the Soviet Union as well. I need to look into that. But when it comes to shooting sport, I think that's what we are doing here at Gun for Glory. Because what we are doing is we are building a community here where it is about finding the talent, but at the same time, it is about nurturing what they already have, and that is to groom them to become better human beings. So I have an athlete here. His name is Danush Rikant. Danush is a hearing impaired kid. He has a cochlear implant which he's had since the age of 1, and for that reason he doesn't hear or speak the way we do. And yet Danush is a popular figure in the shooting sport because he is a deaf Olympian. So he played the Deaf Olympics in Brazil in 2022, and he won 2 gold medals, setting the world record as well. So he when he came back, he was received very warmly by the federations, by the national federations. He had a chance to meet with the prime minister as well. So it was a sort of acknowledgement for the effort that Dhanush has put in. But what the broader story is uncovered when you realize that even being hearing impaired, Dhanush is actually an international medalist in the regular category as well, meaning he competes with the regular kids, the ones who can hear and speak and function completely. And he has won 4 medals as a deaf athlete and 7 medals as a regular athlete, meaning he's even better as a regular athlete compared to a deaf athlete. And as a teacher, Abhishek, you realize that communication is extremely important to reach your child, to reach the children in front of you, to reach any audience for that matter, regardless of their age. And for an athlete who really cannot communicate like a normal person does, to to reach that level, it is not easy, and it is something emboldening to think that maybe in spite of being born with these so-called deficiencies, you might still be able to achieve things that otherwise you would think that only a normal, completely abled person would be able to do. Again, you talk about the Paralympics or the Deaf Olympics. The fact is that these guys are elite level athletes, Abhishek. They are at the pinnacle of the sport. The Olympics is the cream of the crop. So you're talking about the best in the sport. So at the Paris Olympics, we had 2 athletes from my academy, and the funny thing is, one of them is a two-time Olympian, and she's only 24, and the other is so that is 11 Valerivan. The other is Ramita Jintal. At the age of 20, she's actually managed to play the Olympics. And when you speak to these kids, if people saw the Manu Bhaker interview, they would realize how disappointed she was in spite of winning 2 medals when she finished fourth in her other event, in the 25-meter event. But when I spoke to these kids, they were actually really happy. They said that I got to play the Olympics at the age of 20. I am so thankful to my coach. I'm thankful to the academy, to the institution, and it sort of points to the broader perspective shift in the sense that yes, they want to win medals. You cannot play the Olympics if you're not the best, and that means you need to have that edge. you need to have that, I wouldn't say cutthroat, but you need to have that competitive edge if you want to make it to the Olympics. Never mind winning a medal there. And as somebody who's watched at least, so I was also a pistol shooter myself. So I have played and I watched Manu Bhaker play right in front of me. So they come in with that edge. They walk in with that, let's say, that chip on the shoulder. They know that they are the best. But the point is, you still have to do it on the day when it counts. And that means you have to groom the athlete. You have to sort of, there's a lot of techniques that go into it. If you talk to an elite level athlete, they'll tell you that if you read Abhinav Bindra's biography, for example, he talks about how every single day when he opened his eyes, he would visualize himself lifting the gun and placing it at the Olympics and aiming for the target. This is what the first thought was in his mind when he woke up in the morning. So that sort of visualization, as a psychologist would tell you, or a mental trainer, a mind trainer would tell you, is extremely important because the more you learn to deal with that pressure, because a lot of athletes talk. So talent is there in each and every one of us, but the fact is you have to produce on the day it matters. So at the end of the day, you talk about China. So if you talk about the world record score at present, which belongs to a Chinese athlete, in the 10-meter rifle event, which is where Sri Abhinav Bindra won the medal, which is where Arjun Babuta finished fourth at the current Olympics. This is where Mr. Gagan Narang won his medal. Uh, Swapnil was in the 50-meter event. But what they talk about is that they talk about the scores that the Chinese are hitting. But the fact is, I see the kids in front of me. I see Dhanush hitting that score here at the range in front of me. So the question is no longer about ability, Abhishek. It is about performing when it actually matters. That means you need to have that edge. You need to have that mental strength to produce when it actually matters. So I have another athlete who works. So I handle the Kilo India division. We have around 30 athletes in our academy who are sponsored by the central government as a part of the Kilo India Talent Development Scheme. So if there are any parents out there listening to this podcast, if there are any prospective athletes out there who are trying to understand what are the government initiatives, Hello India is a great initiative by the government to identify the up and coming talents and to give them financial support. So we are no longer talking about the cream of the crop. You're not no longer talking about PV Sindhu or Saina Nehwal or Sania Mirza. You're talking about the up and coming 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds. These are the ones who are gonna break. These are the ones who are gonna become household names tomorrow. They are the next Manu Bhaker and the next Sarabjot Singh. So when you talk about these guys, when you talk about Aman Chakrawat, for example, these are guys who are sponsored by the part of these schemes. And at that point of time, my role is to sort of work with the athlete to understand that they are making the best of these government schemes. OGQ being a private organization, it is a non-profit, but it is an NGO. So for that reason, they are sort of, I wouldn't say hindered, but they are sort of limited by the kind of schemes that they can offer. However, the government has stepped in, and over the last few years, they've sort of doubled and tripled the budget, the sports budget that goes into it. So, as somebody who works with state and central government bodies here in Telangana, I can tell you that there's a lot of interest in developing sporting infrastructure, but also in developing athletes as well. So the Khelo India initiative is one such initiative where there is a financial funding that goes into sort of supporting these athletes who are up and coming. And what it does is that helps you make that transition from a national player to an international player, and eventually to an international medalist. So I had this athlete who was world number one in 2022, Rudransh Patel. He was the first Indian after Sri Abhinav Bindra to win gold at the ISSF World Championships, which happen once in 4 years. It is the after the Olympics, it is the premier shooting championship. So this happened in 2022 in Cairo, in Egypt, and he came back with a world record and the gold medal. And of course, at that point of time, when I spoke to him, it was all congratulations, it was all smiles. 2 years down the line, he competed in the Olympic selection trials, and he did not make it through. So I asked him, Rudransh, what went wrong? So he told me it was very enlightening what he said. If people Google it, there are a lot of controversy surrounding the selection policy. But what he said was, I had everything that was required. I was given every single support that I needed. whether it is in terms of equipment, whether it is in terms of sports science, whether it is in terms of coaching. The academy has given him what he needs. The government has given him all the support he requires. But what I did not realize is that I need to be the ultimate decision taker. I need to decide which competitions to play, which not to play. I have to understand the selection policy myself. Maybe I should not have played so many internationals because it put pressure on me, because you travel out of the country, you go to a different country, you play in all these different weather conditions. It's called periodization. Periodization is extremely important. So here at GFG, at Gun for Glory, we've already started periodization for the 2028 LA Olympics, and that started before the Paris Olympics. So that is the way you mold long-term performance, the way you sort of create results. I know I went off on a bit of a sidetrack here, but I think this speaks to the question that you asked about what it takes for somebody to get to the highest levels, and what sort of holistic environment the
Yeah.
federations, the academies, the institutions that surround you can provide, which we do have today. So those who think that it is not there, you just need to do a Google search to find out.
For sure. And what I will do, Arun, is I will link the Kalo India and the Guns for Glory website in the show notes. So for anyone listening that's curious about your program and your work, I'd love for you to, because 1 hour is not enough time to really understand the depth and the nuance of the opportunities available. And I think this would be a great way for young people in India interested in a sport like shooting to understand more about the opportunities. But with Kalo India, I'm sure there are other sports that young people can also be exposed to. Now, for the last question, Arun, what I was curious about, I know you mentioned the name of Kobe Bryant. And when I was preparing for this interview, I know that Manu Bhaker won 2 medals this time, but in the last Olympics in Tokyo, she had like a pistol, like a gun malfunction, right? And that story was not, it must have been such a hard mental toll for someone that dedicated their whole life. And she said that, prayer was something that really helped her. And then even for Sri Gagan Narang ji, in the TED talk, he mentioned that his parents actually sold the land they lived on to buy a gun when they were not sure he was going to be an athlete, and they stayed on rent for 20 years, till and to get their son what he needed. So this is such an inspiring story. But apart from shooting, because you're such a sports enthusiast and sports nerd, are there any athletes that you see in the world, who you are inspired by? For me, it's always been like Michael Jordan or Virat Kohli, just because of their drive and their X factor that they have. But maybe one or two athletes that, or maybe even one athlete who you think, whose career sort of, embodies this journey of mental and physical strength that an athlete should really stand for.
That's a loaded question, but
Like a gun, right?
uh, you are perfect. You are 100% right. I'm very much a sports nerd. I am super into. I've been super into sports for the last couple of decades now, and in spite of being in my 30s, I have always looked at what what could I have done. What would I have done differently? And at that point of time, I'm always into understanding the background of all these athletes. And of course, Kobe is a huge inspiration with his Mamba mentality. And LeBron is another example. MJ though is MJ in terms of mind. Uh, Jordan stands head and shoulders above a lot of these athletes. Cristiano Ronaldo is another example of what it can have, what you can have as what mentality, what champions mentality can do for you as a person, and how you can inspire future generations as well. Whether it is Kobe through his speech at his graduation at his alma mater, or whether it was Ronaldo sort of moving the Coke bottle away from the screen and replacing it with a bottle of water, that actually has a profound impact. I cannot stress enough the impact that those kinds of gestures might have. But since you asked for one, I would say my biggest motivation is the story of Luka Modric. So Luka Modric came from war-torn Croatia. He is around 39 years old person. So you can say in his early 80s, he was born in a country ridden by civil war. and he lost his parents at an early age, was brought up by his grandparents, and then he had to undergo the trauma of losing his grandfather as well. All this before the age of 10. So you can imagine the sort of impact that having and then losing that sort of figure in your life can have. And Modric, if those who follow football know that he is not a physically imposing person. He stands at somewhere around 5'8", 5'9", to my knowledge, which is pretty short for a footballer, for a professional footballer, especially today. And yet he is one of the finest footballers to ever walk the planet because of the mentality factor that he brings in, the never say die attitude that he brings in, whether it is playing for his club or whether it is playing for his country, Croatia, whom as captain he took to their best ever finish at the 2018 World Cup, where they finished in they lost in the final to eventual winners France. But the very fact that a country of the size of Croatia, which I doubt is bigger than the state of Goa, to take that country to the final of the Football World Cup and to win the best player award while being on the losing team. So he ended up. So this World Cup was in Russia, and there was a very interesting stat. I won't take long, but a very interesting stat that popped out during this during after that World Cup. So what happened is in 2020, the sort of Russian doping scandal, all those things came out. But along with that, a very interesting statistic popped out where when the World Cup happened in Russia, when the Football World Cup happened in Russia in 2018, there was a tracking of all the top athletes, their how many kilometers that did they run, what was the top speeds that they achieved, a lot of other things, what was the area they covered, blah blah blah. One pointed statistic was how much distance that each athlete covered over the span of 90 minutes, which is the duration of a football match. So you divide it by the number of matches you played, and you get the total distance covered per 90 minutes, which is the duration of a match. And out of the top 10, the top 9 were Russians, which sort of points to the fact maybe it had something to do with the fact that the doping scandal whatsoever, because we've never talked about Russia as a powerhouse in football, and it's not like they produced that sort of result, maybe even at an individual level, even though it's a pretty decent team. But the 10th name on that list was 33-year-old Luka Modric. So a 33-year-old, so a 30 as I can guarantee you, you and I are almost there now. So 33-year-olds do not cover that sort of distance of 10 kilometers, 11 kilometers across a span of 90 minutes, unless you are physically and mentally driven to do that. So the fact is that he actually competed with people who were on dope. The fact that he actually managed to crack that top 10 itself speaks volumes about him, because he was not expected to play that role. His role was more of controlling the game. His goal against Argentina was everything that a football fan wants to see, because it was a performance of the highest standards. But the very fact that he managed to do it competing against a set of people who were actually who were taking performance enhancing drugs, and actually to perform at that level, and then to take that country to the final of the toughest competition on the planet, while there's like 1.4 billion people watching him. The very fact that he did it, and then of course everybody, when talks about football, of course it's the Messi Ronaldo debate, but Modric was the only individual since 2007, when 2008, when Kaka won the Ballon d'Or, the best player in the world award. It was all Messi and Ronaldo after that. And yet in 2018, he is the one who broke that duopoly of Messi and Ronaldo by being crowned the best player in the world. So that sort of speaks volumes about the mentality of someone who came through a civil war, lost his family members, lost crucial family members at a formative age, and then came through a system which frankly speaking, India has a way better system than those kind of countries have, whether it's the Czech Republic or Serbia or Croatia, and yet managing to come through that system and yet showing the mentality that it takes to perform at the highest levels in front of God knows how many billion people are watching you. that sort of speaks volumes about what this guy has up here and a certain other place which I don't want to talk about. But the very fact that he's able to do it consistently and he's still going strong at the age of 39. He still plays for one of the biggest football clubs on the planet in Real Madrid. He still continues to represent Croatia and captain them. And while he may not be at his prime, his career, like Jordan's, speaks for itself. So if you ask me, he is everything that you want to see in an athlete. He's a family man. He takes care of his body because let's be honest, at the age of 39, it is very rare to find a professional playing at the highest levels of the game. And the fact that he continues to do it is an inspiration to each and every one of us.
Yeah, and I think like listening to you today, I just realized that being an athlete is not just such a physical thing. It's both a physical and a mental journey. And I think it's not something you can just do once, but it's something you have to be consistent and disciplined with for a really long time. And I think when once you are an athlete, you are always an athlete. So skills that young people learn as an athlete can be transferred onto any other area of their life and can help them in so many different ways in any pursuit that they go on to do. So, it was really, really inspiring hearing you speak, Arun. I really hope a lot of young people listen to this. Not just young people that are curious about sports, but also your journey in terms of how you transferred from, the meningitis to, taking up football to going to engineering to, doing so well in sports management. I think there's a lot we can learn from over there, Arun.
I appreciate you having me here, Abhishek, and I really love what you're doing here. So, the very fact that you ask these questions, the very fact that you are interested, and people are reaching out and asking the right kind of questions, does point to that change in mentality. That is what I want to see as somebody in this industry, in this environment, is people asking the right kind of questions. I don't mind. So it's like we say in teaching also, there are no stupid questions. The
Yeah.
only stupid people are the ones who don't ask the questions. When you ask the questions and you get the answers and then you start your journey, it is also spiritual. It is an awakening by itself. And I hope that a lot of people, I mean, anybody who listens gets. I always tell people that anytime you listen, if you take something of value away from every conversation that you have with any individual, it could be a 6 year old, it could be a 60-year-old, but if you take away something of value from that conversation, it means that you've done your due diligence. So if I'm glad that of course you will be listing the details of Kilo India, but if anybody out there who has any questions about how to make it big, my contacts are available on LinkedIn as well. So anybody, if they have any doubts, I'm available for any questions that they might have, whether it is to make it as an athlete or it is to make it as a as somebody who wants to contribute to the environment of sports.
For sure. And I will be linking Arun's LinkedIn profile in the show notes as well. And for the listeners tuning in, thank you again for listening to this episode of Learning Stories. Do subscribe to the channel, and you can listen to this episode of Learning Stories on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, GeoSavan, and YouTube. I'm excited to release this episode and excited to see your response to this. Thank you again for listening to this episode. And this is Abhishek Shetty signing off with Arun Mulloth on the Learning Stories podcast.